I used to be the comics buyer at a public library, and sometimes parents would come in and they'd say, look, I really want my kid to read more. Do you have any recommendations? And I'd always push comics, and frequently parents would be like, I really don't want to give them comics because I want them to read, and this just doesn't really count. I'm going to tell you what I told them because every parent needs to hear this. If you want your kid to be a good reader, give them comics. One of the biggest battles early on with getting kids to read is just getting them to pay attention to a book. And especially for kids who are used to screens and who are used to vibrant visuals, comics are a nice transition for that because they actually can hold their attention. And for kids that are still learning to read, big blocks of text can be kind of intimidating, and you don't get as many of those in comics. But just because there are pictures in it doesn't mean that they're not still learning how to read. One of the nice things about comics is that the words and the pictures interact with each other. So kids who are trying to figure out what's going on in the story need to pay attention to both. This is especially beneficial for kids who are struggling with vocabulary or trying to figure out what a word means. If you see a word and you have no idea what it means, but there's something happening on the page that gives you some clues, it gives you some context the next time you're reading that word to kind of get a sense of where it's going. On a personal note, I cannot tell you how much of my early vocabulary came from Calvin and Hobbes. My favorite study to cite was one out of the University of Oregon, which found that comics have a higher incidence of rare words, around 53 out of 1,000, compared to children's books, which is around 30 out of 1,000. What was even better is that this study found that comics actually have more rare words than adult literature does, which is at around 52 words per 1,000. In a more subjective sense, another thing comics do is they really foster a love of reading. I really started getting into reading through comics, mostly Garfield, The Far Side, Calvin and Hobbes, Foxtrot, just things that I found in my school library. One could argue I read those books too much. I still have Calvin and Hobbes comics memorized now 30 years later. But I am positive that if I hadn't done that when I was a kid, I would not have become such a prolific reader later in life. Comics aren't just transition books from children's books to adult books. I still read them to this day. Some of the most beautiful things I've ever read are comics. But they help kids get the repetition part of reading in, and they help kids get excited about reading. And eventually, if you get so comfortable reading a bunch of comics that you can just breeze through those words, you realize, oh, I can get through this novel too. Even broader than that, if you want your kids to be into reading, let them lead the way. The stuff that draws their attention is the stuff that you should just give them tons of access to. Nothing kills a kid's love faster than the word should. The best thing that you can do as a parent is give them access to as much of what they love as you can and then just get out of their way. Also, you as a grown-up should totally read more comics, but that is for another video. If that sort of thing sounds like something you'd like, give me a follow. My name is Hirsch. I write about books, and I write about facing a bleak world with hope, curiosity, and imagination.